Welcome to the Heartbreak Chronicles, where every story is a raw reflection of life. Hit that subscribe button to stay tuned, give us a like to show your support, and share this episode with your friends. Don't forget to leave a comment and let us know what you think. Now, let's dive into today's story. Little did James know that ordinary Thursday morning that his life was about to change forever. As a senior manager at London financial giant Jordan & Sons, James is used to dealing with all kinds of emergencies. But James still feels a twinge of unease when Tony, the son of the company's owner, bursts into his office. "James, you need to fly to New York right away. There's a problem over at the Johnson Group, and we could lose this client." Tony's tone revealed anxiety. James frowned. "But Tony, I have a date with Sarah to go to the play tonight." "Don't be ridiculous," interrupted Tony impatiently, "and the Johnson Group is nearly half of our company's revenue stream. Do you want to watch this deal fly?" There was no choice but for James to agree to depart immediately. He dialed his wife, Sarah. Sarah also works at Jordan & Sons and is secretary to Tony's brother Robert. "Honey, I'm so sorry. There was a sudden emergency at the office and I had to fly to New York right away," James said apologetically. Sarah on the other end of the line was silent for a moment, then replied coldly, "Okay, I get it." After hanging up the phone, James was a little uneasy. Sarah's recent attitude confused him, but he blamed it on work stress. After hastily packing his bags, James rushed to the airport. Just as he was about to enter the airport, a conspicuous yellow Lamborghini caught his eye. The window rolled down, and he was surprised to see Sarah in the passenger seat, and it was Robert who was driving. James' heart clenched violently. Why is Sarah with Robert? Where are they going? All sorts of questions swirled in his mind. He wanted to go after him and ask for clarification, but the boarding announcement interrupted his thoughts. After the plane takes off, James tries to calm himself and focus on the upcoming business meeting. However, images of Sarah and Robert together kept flashing through his mind. Have I been so busy lately that I've neglected Sarah? He wondered reproachfully to himself, but that doesn't excuse her from being close to Robert. An even bigger surprise awaits James upon his arrival in New York. The Johnson Group's reception was exceptionally warm and went far beyond ordinary customer relations. Paul Johnson, the company's president, personally greeted James at the airport and also arranged for him to stay in the company's luxury suite. At the dinner, Paul toasted James frequently, his words full of innuendo. "James, your ability in the industry is evident to all. A talent like yours shouldn't be confined to one company." Alarm bells went off in James' mind. Is this trolling? He mused. If there really is a better opportunity, why not consider it? But could this have anything to do with Tony suddenly wanting me to come to New York? With mixed feelings, James tries to contact Sarah to share the news, only to find that his wife's cell phone has gone unanswered. What's more disturbing to him is that he can't reach Robert on the company side either. Could Sarah really be with Robert? James didn't dare to think further. His heart was full of contradictions and doubts. On the one hand, he's excited about the new opportunities that may be available to him. On the other hand, he's increasingly skeptical about Sarah and Robert's relationship. Lying in his hotel bed, James tossed and turned. The trip to New York brought not only career opportunities, but also a huge turning point in his married life. He had a vague feeling that when he returned to London, he might be faced with a situation that would change his life forever. But James could never have imagined that what awaited him would be a truth even more shocking than he could have imagined. In the early morning London mist, a cab pulled up quietly in front of a typical English townhouse on Cheswick High Road. James Turner got out of his car, his tired eyes revealing unease and anxiety. He was supposed to be in New York on important company business, but inner turmoil drove him to end his trip early. James stood in front of his house, gazing at the familiar yellow Lamborghini. It was Robert's car, parked in his driveway at the moment, as if silently mocking his stupidity. James' hand paused in front of the keyhole, took a deep breath, and gently inserted the key into the lock hole. The door opened noiselessly and James tiptoed inside. The living room was silent as the early morning sunlight poured through the gaps in the curtains and onto the floor. James' eyes swept over the familiar furniture, each piece holding memories of his and Sarah's 10 years together. Now, all these memories seem bitter. He walked softly up the stairs, his heartbeat loud in the silence of the house. At the end of the hallway, the bedroom door was hidden. James stood in front of the door and closed his eyes, as if he was making final mental preparations for the reality he was about to face. Pushing the door open, the sight in front of him hit James like a hammer, hard on his heart. Sarah and Robert are entwined, stunned by the sudden intrusion. Sarah panicked and covered herself with the sheet, while Robert stared at James with wide eyes like a frightened rabbit. "James, what are you doing back here?" Sarah's voice trembled and the expression on her face quickly changed from horror to shame and fear. James stood in the doorway, feeling the blood boil throughout his body. His gaze swept back and forth between Sarah and Robert, as if to make sure this wasn't a nightmare. But the reality is harsher than the nightmare. "Why?" James' voice was low and shaky with disbelief and pain. "We've been together for 10 years, Sarah. 10 years. Is that how you feel about me?" Sarah scrambled into her robe as tears came to her eyes. "James, please let me explain. It's not what you think. We. Robert tried to speak. "James, listen to me. It's not what you think." James turned violently toward Robert and snarled, "Shut up, you despicable asshole." His voice was filled with an unquenchable sense of anger and betrayal. Sarah sobbed and walked towards James, trying to take his hand. "James, please calm down. I know I made a big mistake, but please give me a chance to explain." James shook off Sarah's hand, anger rising like a tidal wave. He lunged at Robert, and the two wrestled instantly. Sarah screamed and tried to separate them. "James, stop, please," Sarah cried. "We can talk, okay? Like we always do." But James has lost his mind. Fists rained down on Robert, each one seeming to vent the years of aggression and anger. "Get out. Both of you get out of here," James growled, pushing Robert toward the door. Robert stumbled and almost fell down the hallway. Sarah knelt down in front of James and burst into tears. "James, I love you. It was just a terrible mistake. Please give me a chance to work this out together." "Solution?" James sneered, sarcasm and pain in his eyes. "What else do you have to explain? Pack your things and leave this house immediately." James began to roughly rip Sarah's clothes out of the closet and haphazardly stuff them into the suitcase. Sarah stood by and kept pleading, "James, please listen to me. You've been so busy this whole time and I feel so alone." "Robert, he just happened to be there. I know that's no excuse, but please believe me, I never meant to hurt you." James jerked to a halt in his hands and turned to Sarah, pain and anger in his eyes. "Alone? Is that why you betrayed me? Sarah, what about the vows we took when we got married? Through good times and bad. Do you remember?" Sarah choked back a sob. "I remember, James. I regret it every day. Please give me a chance to make amends." "Make amends?" James laughed bitterly. "You think you can make up for something like that? Our trust, our love, has been shattered. How are you going to make it right?" Sarah reached out to touch James' face, but he dodged it. "James, we can go to counseling together and rebuild our relationship. I would do anything to regain your trust." James shook his head, the anger in his eyes gradually being replaced by deep disappointment and exhaustion. "It's too late, Sarah. It's too late." He continued to pack Sarah's belongings, each piece of clothing that had once held memories of them, now an unbearable presence. "James, please think again about our past, about the dreams we shared." Sarah's voice was tinged with tears. "Don't these 10 years mean anything to you at all?" James stopped what he was doing and gave Sarah a deep look. "It's precisely because those 10 years were so important to me that I can't forgive you for your betrayal." After pushing Sarah and Robert out the door, James closed it heavily and leaned against it, trembling. Outside the door, Sarah kept knocking, crying, "James, please open the door. Let's talk. I love you and I'm really sorry. James, please." But James turned a deaf ear as he slowly slid into a sitting position, burying his head between his knees. Sarah's cries and pleas continued for a long time until they finally faded away. 10 years of marriage collapsed completely in this moment. James feels like his world has turned upside down and all his trust and love has gone up in smoke. He didn't know how long he sat on the floor until the voices outside the door faded. James Turner stood in front of the mirror and stared at his haggard face. The last few months have been a nightmare, from the discovery of Sarah's betrayal to now. His life has changed forever. James can't help but laugh bitterly when he thinks back on the divorce. That day, he went to see his lawyer with a lot of anger and demanded that the divorce be finalized as soon as possible. Sarah made several attempts to contact him, trying to explain, but James refused all communication. On the advice of their attorney, they ultimately opted for an expedited divorce process. On the day of the signing, Sarah looked haggard, and she wanted to say, "James, there's something you need to know." But James interrupted her. "There's nothing more to say, Sarah. Sign it." Sarah tearfully signed the divorce papers. And so, 10 years of marriage came to an end. Shortly after the divorce, James submitted his resignation. Facing Robert every day and remembering his betrayal, James feels unable to breathe. Tony seems exceptionally pleased with James' decision and even offers a generous severance package. "James, we really appreciate your dedication over the years," Tony said with a smile. "And this compensation is the company's way of thanking you." James looked coldly at Tony. "No need. I just want my regular paycheck and compensation." Nonetheless, the company gave James a sizable sum of money. Unbeknownst to James at the time, this played right into Tony and Robert's hands. After leaving Jordan and Sons, James used that money to rent a small apartment and try to start his life over. He started taking on freelance work in financial consulting, but the trauma inside made it difficult for him to devote himself fully to his work. Just when James thinks his life is going to be so uneventful, an unexpected phone call changes everything. "Mr. Turner, I'm Simon Johnson's secretary. Mr. Johnson would like to make an appointment to see you. He says he has something important to tell you." This sudden invitation confused James. Simon Johnson, former CEO of the Johnson Group. Why do we need to see him? With his mind full of questions, James arrived at the agreed-upon fancy hotel. Pushing open the door to the conference room, he saw Simon Johnson. The business tycoon is over 70 years old, but his eyes are still sharp. "James, thanks for coming." Simon smiled. "I know it's been a rough couple months for you." James nodded and went straight to the point. "Mr. Simon, what did you want to see me about?" Simon's expression became serious. "James, I'm going to tell you something about Henry Jordan that could revolutionize your life." James frowned, wondering why they were talking about the late Henry Jordan. Simon slowed down. Henry has actually known for a long time that Tony and Robert are not his biological sons. The news came as a bolt from the blue, and James' eyes widened. Simon continued, "Henry always considered you his son. Before he passed away, he arranged everything so that I could transfer control of the company to you at the right time." James was shocked beyond words. Simon pulled a stack of papers out of his briefcase. "These are all the relevant legal documents and account information. James, you are the true heir to Jordan and Sons." James asked with difficulty, "But why wait until now?" Simon sighed. "Henry knew Tony and Robert would destroy the company. He wanted to protect you and his life's work. But he was worried that if he left the company to you outright, you'd face endless legal battles. So he devised this plan." James suddenly realized, "So, I was forced to resign." Simon nodded. "That's right. Tony and Robert have been looking for Henry's hidden fortune. They set you up to find Sarah and Robert together just to force you to leave the company. They thought they could control everything that way." James felt a wave of vertigo. "So, Sarah's betrayal." "I'm sorry, James," Simon said, "but Sarah may have been a victim of this conspiracy as well." James was silent for a moment, then asked, "And now what?" Simon flashed a smile. "Now you can take back control of Jordan and Sons. Henry's plan is for me to transfer control to you after you've been away from the company for a while. This will avoid any legal trouble." Just then, James' cell phone suddenly rang. "It's an unfamiliar number." "Mr. Turner?" came a female voice. "I'm June Parsons from Slow Social Services. We have an emergency here involving 2 children and a mother who attempted suicide. We found a letter at the scene with your name on it." James' heart raced. Who? Who wrote the letter? The letter starts with "Dear James," June said, and is signed by Sarah Crawford. James felt like his world was falling apart again. Sarah? Suicide? And the baby? "I'll be right over." James hung up after that, then turned to Simon. "I'm sorry, I have to leave right away. There's an emergency." Simon nodded understandingly. "Go ahead, James. Remember, no matter what happens, you're not alone anymore. I'll always be there for you." James left the hotel in a hurry, his mind reeling. He went straight to Slow Social Services Center with a lot of fear and anxiety inside him. Upon arrival at the center, June Parsons immediately took him to a quiet room. "Mr. Turner, the situation is more complicated than we expected," June said. "Sarah is out of danger, but she insists on seeing you." James took a deep breath and nodded. When he walks into Sarah's hospital room, he is shocked by the sight before him. Sarah is lying in a hospital bed, pale and with a bandage on her arm. But what surprised James even more was the fact that sitting next to the bed were 2 little girls about 5 years old who looked almost exactly alike. "James," Sarah said weakly, "I'm sorry, but you need to know the truth." James looked at Sarah and the 2 little girls in confusion and suddenly realized something. "Sarah, this is—" Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, James. They are Kate and Heather, our daughters." "Your daughters?" James felt like his world was spinning. He couldn't believe his ears. "My daughter? But how is that possible?" Sarah took a deep breath and began to explain. "James, this story starts 5 years ago. Remember the time you were expatriated to New York? That's when I found out I was pregnant." James nodded, recalling that fateful business trip. Sarah continued, "At the time, I was going to tell you the good news. But—" her voice was a little choked. "I started hearing rumors. Robert and Tony were constantly in my face discussing your affairs out of town. They said you had women in every city. At first I didn't believe them, but the details they provided were so specific. The hotels you stayed in, the restaurants you visited, even the gifts you bought." James was shocked, speechless, and Sarah continued, "I felt very hurt and angry. I decided that if you could have secrets, then so could I. I told the company I needed to take an extended vacation under the pretext of taking care of a sick, distant relative. I moved to a small town in Brighton where no one knew me. I rented a small apartment with my savings and started my reclusive life. I spent my entire pregnancy there. I got a private doctor and paid extra to ensure privacy." Sarah's eyes were filled with remorse. "I almost faltered when the twins were born. How I wish you could have been there to share this wonderful moment. But my pride and broken heart stopped me. After the children were born, I took a few more months off before returning to London. I told everyone that the twins were the children of my distant cousin who died in an accident, so I adopted them. No one doubts the story. After all, who would have thought the truth would be like that?" James couldn't believe his ears. "But Sarah, why didn't you tell me even after we separated? You didn't tell me?" Sarah closed her eyes in pain. "I tried to tell you, James. Remember? The day we signed the divorce papers, I tried to talk. But you were so angry then that you wouldn't listen to anything I had to say. After that, my pride got the better of me again. I told myself that since you didn't want to hear it, you should never know. I've struggled over the years. Every time I see my children, I see you. My heart bleeds when they ask about their father. But I keep telling myself that this is your punishment, that you deserve it." Sarah's voice quivered. "It wasn't until recently that I realized I wasn't just punishing you, but myself and these 2 innocent children. I denied them the right to have a father, and I denied you the right to be a father. I can't continue to bear this burden." James felt a strong wave of vertigo. He remembered all of Sarah's unusual behavior during those years, and now it all made sense. He felt both anger and heartache, but more than anything else, deep remorse for missing out on his daughters growing up. I don't know what to say," James mumbled, tears in his eyes. "I missed so much." Sarah reached out and gently took James' hand. I'm so sorry, James, that I know my behavior was unforgivable. But now, for the sake of the children, can we? James took a deep breath and looked at Sarah and then at his two daughters. He realized that no matter what had happened in the past, they now had new responsibilities and opportunities. We'll figure it out, Sarah, James said, determination in his voice. For Kate and Heather, we'll find a way. Just then, Kate timidly asked, Are you really our dad? James felt a hard tug on his heart. He knelt down, looked at the two girls levelly, and said softly, Yes, I'm your father. I'm sorry I wasn't in your lives sooner, but from now on, I'll always be there for you. Heather and Kate looked at each other and smiled, then simultaneously jumped into James' arms. James hugged them tightly, tears streaming down his face uncontrollably. In this moment, James realizes that his life has once again been turned upside down. But this time, he felt not only shock and pain, but also hope and a new sense of responsibility. Whatever the future holds, James knows he must fight for the reunited family. At the same time, he's secretly determined to get to the bottom of the rumors Robert and Tony are spreading and the role they're playing in this whole thing. James Turner stood in the hospital hallway, reflecting on everything that had happened in the last 72 hours. Sarah's suicide attempt, the existence of the twins, the truth about the company's inheritance, it's all spinning out of control for him. 3 days ago, Sarah overdosed on sleeping pills in desperation. The decision did not come out of the blue, but was the result of the accumulation of chronic stress and guilt. Sarah's life has deteriorated since her divorce from James. She was raising her twins alone and was under tremendous financial stress. To make matters worse, Robert abandons her after using her, leaving behind a pile of debt. Sarah is in deep financial trouble, and her creditors are constantly harassing her. She tried multiple jobs, but still couldn't make ends meet. Every time she saw Kate and Heather's faces, she thought of James, and the guilt overwhelmed her like a tidal wave. She begins to question her decision to hide the existence of her child, but doesn't know how to fix the mistake. The last straw was when she found out she might lose custody. A concerned neighbor reported her plight, and social services began investigating her ability to care for her children. Fear, despair, and guilt are intertwined, and Sarah can't see any way out. The very night before her suicide, Sarah wrote a letter to James explaining everything, including the existence of the baby. She hopes James will forgive her and that he will take care of Kate and Heather. Luckily, her neighbor Lisa found it just in time. Later that night, Lisa comes to borrow some candy, only to find Sarah's door half open. She walks in and sees Sarah collapsed on the floor with empty pill bottles strewn beside her. Lisa immediately called emergency services and administered initial first aid before the ambulance arrived. The doctors were able to stabilize Sarah's condition after some resuscitation. It was then that social worker June Parsons contacted James, which revealed the shocking truth. Mr. Turner, the attending physician, said as he approached, Mrs. Crawford's physical condition has stabilized, but her mental state still requires close attention. From her medical history, she has struggled with depression and anxiety. I would strongly recommend that she receive long-term counseling after she is discharged from the hospital. James nodded, his heart filled with mixed emotions. He felt anger, sadness, guilt, but more than anything, he was worried about Sarah and the children. I understand, thank you, doctor. I'll make sure she gets the best care possible. No matter what has happened in the past, she is the mother of my children. The doctor looked at James approvingly. You have a great attitude, Mr. Turner. What Mrs. Crawford needs most right now is support and understanding. Her behavior, while sad, reflects her inner pain and struggle. James took a deep breath. We'll get through this together. Not only for the kids, but for Sarah herself. At the same time, James was struggling to understand and come to terms with the fact that he had suddenly become the de facto controller of Jordan & Sons. The stack of papers given to him by Simon Johnson contained detailed legal documents, equity transfer agreements, and proof of ownership of the offshore company. James contacted a top corporate legal expert, Emma Thompson. Mr. Turner, Emma said over the phone, I reviewed all the documents carefully. They are all legally valid. Henry Jordan has ensured, through a series of complex legal arrangements, that these assets and control are automatically transferred to your name after you have been away from the company for a certain period of time. But, James asked, Tony and Robert won't give up easily. What are we going to do about it? Emma replied confidently, we have a strong legal case. First, we will apply to the court for an interim injunction to stop Tony and Robert from doing anything that could harm the company's interests. Then we'll hold an emergency board meeting to announce your new status. Over the next few days, James ran between the hospital and the law office. He took care of Sarah and the kids, while working closely with Emma to prepare every detail of taking over the company. A week later, James stood in the doorway of Jordan and Son's boardroom and took a deep breath. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The directors in the room looked at him in surprise. Tony was the first to stand up with anger on his face. James, what are you doing here? You're not part of the company anymore. James said calmly, on the contrary, Tony, I'm here to announce some important changes. He signaled Emma to distribute the papers. These documents prove that I am the de facto controller of the company as per the arrangement of the late Henry Jordan. As of today, I will be taking back control of the company's operations. Robert snapped to his feet. This can't be. This must be a forgery. Emma calmly intervened. These documents have been legally verified. More importantly, the court has granted a temporary injunction prohibiting you from interfering with the normal operations of the company. If you try to obstruct it, you will face serious legal consequences. The conference room was thrown into chaos. Some board members expressed support for James, while others were hesitant. James held up his hand, signaling for silence. I understand that this is a huge shock to you. However, I assure you that these changes are for the long-term benefit of the company. Over the next few days, I will be meeting one-on-one with each of the directors to hear your views and suggestions. Together, we will develop a new growth strategy that will put Jordan and Sons back on the map as an industry leader. After the meeting, James returned to the hospital. He walks into Sarah's hospital room and sees her playing with her two daughters. Sarah, James said softly, we need to talk. Sarah nodded and told the nurse to take the kids to the playroom. James sat down and took a deep breath. The doctor said you can be discharged. But given the current circumstances, I think it would be best if you and the children move to my estate. There's plenty of room there and the security is good. Sarah looked at James in surprise. You're willing to let us live there? Even after everything that's happened? James said seriously, look, Sarah, a lot did happen between us. A lot of misunderstandings and hurt. But right now, the most important thing is the kids. They need a safe, stable environment. We can take our time to work things out between us. And, he paused, I want to make up for the lost time of the last 5 years. Sarah nodded gratefully, tears welling up in her eyes. Over the next few months, James was busy reorganizing his company and rebuilding his family. He hired a top-notch management team and began implementing a series of reforms. At the same time, he spends a lot of time with Kate and Heather, trying to get to know them and become a competent father. In the process, James and Sarah also slowly rebuild trust. They attend family therapy together, learning how to communicate and how to forgive past mistakes. A year later, at Kate and Heather's 6th birthday party, James looked at the laughing children and a smiling Sarah and felt a happiness he had never felt before. Simon Johnson walked over to James and patted him on the shoulder. You've done a great job, James. Not only in the company, but on the home front as well. Henry would be proud of you. James smiled and said, Thank you, Simon. I couldn't have come this far without your help and guidance. As he looks around and sees his rejuvenated family and his thriving company, James comes to a deep realization that the most important things in life are not money or power, but family and love. He finally understood Henry Jordan's good intentions and found the true meaning of his life. As night falls, James holds his two daughters with Sarah snuggled up next to him. He knows that the road ahead will not be easy, that Tony and Robert may still cause trouble, and that the company will face many challenges in reforming itself. But as long as he has his family by his side, he has the courage to face everything. James Turner, the man who once lost everything, now has more than he ever imagined. Not only did he rebuild his career, but more importantly, he found what is truly precious in life, the love and support of his family. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.